Hey guys, welcome back to We Got Balls. And just so you know, we do listen to the comments that are given on these podcasts. And we had a commenter, a listener in the last few days who made a comment about our videos. Very complimentary, very kind. But he was asking about this topic of manscaping, of pubic hair. And that's kind of in the zeitgeist of culture for women especially. But we don't talk much about dudes and what does it mean to take care of your junk down there. And that's one of those things in my own life, Scott, that I've been very creative with over the years. I've had all kind of hairstyles when it comes to my pubic region.
Really?
And the reason is because way back when, back in, I think I want to say 1998, there was this movie called Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a scene in that movie, Austin Powers, where Dr. Evil is talking about his dad and the things that he learned from his dad. And one of the things that he learned from his dad was there's nothing quite like a freshly shorn scrotum. It's been taken. And so I was like, I wonder what is it like a freshly shorn scrotum? I'll try that out. And dude, got me hooked. I don't like the pricklies in the pubic region for sure. But that's where a lot of guys are. They're trying to figure out what to do, how to do it. And again, this is not an advice podcast. We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're just going to talk a little bit about our experiences and our impressions and kind of de-shame. I mean, that's what we do on this podcast, right, Scott? We de-shame things, and we're de-shaming manscaping today.
We are not going to vilify manscaping or endorse it. We're just going to be curious about it. Yeah. But I thought you were going to be referring to the scene where he's with Frolata Vagina, and he takes his shirt off, and he's got two balls and a dick manscaped into his chest hair.
That's right.
Right. That was the other big...
beautiful display of manly chest hair for sure.
So let's expand manscaping to the full body of the man, because it's not just about your pubes. It's about your back hair. It's about your chest hair. It's about your leg hair now. So like it's a thing. There's all kinds of manscaping trimmers out there. You can subscribe.
Manscaped.com. Give us a plug. We'll make sure to shout
Manscaped.com. You can buy the lawnmower if you want to trim it all off, cut the grass.
And let the grass grow.
My favorite saying about this, Chris, is if you want the tree trunk to look big, you got to trim the bushes around the base of it. So that takes us to where did shaving your pubes, shaving your body as a man start to develop in culture? Where do you think this starts?
I have no clue. I have done zero research on this topic. I can guess that it's probably was around the 60s or 70s when people started to be more comfortable with public nudity in the modern era, and B, begin to have the leisure time to even think about that. I mean, because frankly, if you're working 12 hours a day slaving away, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is, how much hair you have on your body. You're just going to try to keep it clean and rest it. But when you have a little more flexibility, a little more bandwidth, and I have an idea. Maybe porn.
Okay now. So I grew up. I was born in 1962. I grew up in the 70s, and so much of what sets kind of, I think, we're talking about masculine ideals, and pubic hair, body hair is a secondary sexual characteristic. And some people find that arousing and attractive, and other people find that disgusting and repulsive. And for me, body hair was always a mark of masculinity. And I've done some work on this because it's a part of my story. And so I'll just tell a little bit of my story around this, is that growing up in the 60s and 70s, as I've kind of processed, why is it that hairy guys that's arousing to me? That's exciting. That's what masculinity is all about. And the things that I've been able to piece together is a couple of vignettes. One is when I was a little boy, I would be eating my toast at the breakfast table, and I would take the crust off of it because it's harder than the rest of the toast. And my dad would come in and go, "You should eat that. That'll put hair on your chest." So there's this reinforcement as a message that men are hairy, right?
So let's put a pin in that, because that hair on your chest comment seems to be an older version of this is what it means to be a man. If you're a man, you got hair on your chest. If you're not yet a man, you don't yet have hair on your chest. Important differentiation.
Well, even C.S. Lewis, I think, wrote an article called Men with Chests. It's not about chest hair per se. It's about men have strength in their chest. And so body hair on your chest is emblematic to me of that. And it starts with this story around my dad. The second thing that I can think of that really influenced this is the biggest movie star when I was growing up, and we saw a ton of his movies, was Robert Redford. He was in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He was in The Sting. He was in Jeremiah Johnson, which I had to see at least 15 times. And Robert Redford's a hairy dude. So think about the images that I'm seeing of this man, this American masculine man. And this message that's being communicated is this is what a man is like. Now, it's a subtle message that he's hairy, but it's delivered nonetheless by his body, right? So much of human communication is nonverbal, and it could be the appearance of a person. So what do we start to believe about masculinity? I start to believe that masculine men are hairy because this guy is the quintessential American, masculine celebrity. And then there's an incident that I've shared before on the podcast where my dad was a scout for a football team, for his college football team, and he took me into a locker room when I was in fourth grade. And at the end of the locker room, these guys were all from a town filled with a lot of Italian immigrants, and they're all naked, running around naked after the football game, showering and horsing around in the locker room. They're all have adult bodies, big penises, and they're all hairy. And I'm like, this is an amazing sight. And I'm going to use the word. It aroused me. Not it didn't give me a boner,
Yeah.
but I thought it was beautiful.
Well,
I thought it was
exciting. It's what
it was exciting. It was like, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so none of that was ever communicated, but my father notices me staring, and he grabs my head and turns it towards the wall. And you know what I felt? Shame.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with me for thinking this is an amazing sight. Yeah. And my desire to be in that was also shamed.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning for many people and their shame around body hair, because the first body hair that most people get, everybody gets that I'm aware of, is pubic hair. And if you grew up in an environment where there was no conversation around sexuality, or if there was a conversation around sexuality, it was like this: your body's going to change, things are going to get a little different, you're going to start getting hair down there, your stuff's going to change, you're going to grow things in places, you're going to have weird sensations, you're going to be
your
attracted to the
whatchamacallit's going to do that thing, and then it might do that other
might
thing.
Get hard, and you might get a little goof out the
no,
end.
No, we're not. That's too much. That's too much.
But you start, you're 11, 12, 13, maybe younger than that, years old. And you start looking down and you're like, okay, in an area of my body that was pretty much, it was just the toilet. That's all I had to worry about, was what came out to go pee and to make sure I washed it. Now it's got hair growing.
Yeah. And so I have another story around that, because my best friend when I was in sixth grade was a guy named Kurt. He had an older brother named Tony, and Tony had already been through puberty, and they would come over, both of them, and spend the night. And this was in the 70s. And we lived on an acreage in Colorado out in the country. And we got into streaking as boys, because that's what everybody was doing in the culture at the time. Is we'd put on our tennis shoes and go run around naked or just kind of horse around. And Tony had pubic hair and I didn't, because I'm in sixth grade and Tony's in seventh or eighth grade. And I remember Kurt spending the night one night. We were both in sleeping bags and we started horsing around and pulling our sleeping bags down and pulling our shorts down and showing our penises to each other. And now I notice Kurt has pubic hair and I'm like, I don't. And I'm thinking, well, what's wrong with me? But my birthday was in August, so I'm younger than these guys by about a year, even in my classmates. And so a lot of our stories of shame start around that very type of thing. Either it's kind of sexual play, horseplay with other guys, or it's having to shower for the first time in seventh grade, and you're a late bloomer, and there's a kid in seventh grade that's already shaven and has chest hair. Like, how unfair is that?
And it goes back to that idea of nobody taught me about this. I'm insecure. I don't have an identity around what this means. And so I see somebody that's, I mean, let's be honest, there's nothing attractive about pubic hair. It just is, right? There's nothing, maybe body hair for some people. And I know there's some people who are aroused by shaved pubic regions or trimmed pubic regions. There's big conversations around the appropriate ways to trim your pubic hair to be attractive to a man. But it's just something that you got to deal with, unless you're going to do a laser treatment and wax it all off or whatever. It's difference. It's there's an otherness to it. And what you're talking about is this: you had nothing and this older boy had something. And so now there's this feeling inside of you that's you're different than this guy, and maybe you should be like him.
And plus I'm seeing these cultural icons that have hairy bodies, and I've had these other experiences. And so what's the message? You got to be hairy to be a guy, and I'm not hairy yet, and now I feel shame again, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue,
and let's be clear about why the shame is there. The shame is there because
of the lack of care and communication about my developing body.
Because of silence. Guys, when there is silence around an issue, who likes to talk about pubic hair? No, I mean, you're like, well, the We Got Balls guys do. Well, we talk about all kinds of shit. That's just what we do. We're just out there like that. But if your kid, if your friends are ashamed to talk about things and you stay silent with them, if your family members need to hear from you on this, and I'm thinking about this because in a few months I'm going to be going on a trip with a bunch of guys, and we're going to invite some young men into masculinity. And one of the conversations that we're going to have is about penises. And I will say to these dads, guess what? If you've not talked to your son about your penis, you better start now, because otherwise they're going to feel ashamed, just like we're talking about.
Exactly right. And so in this context of lack of communication, silence, i.e., then you're left to fill in the details for yourself. And because we typically feel a lot of shame about our bodies, and there's a lot of secrecy around sexuality in our bodies, the messages that we fill in aren't very good. Something's wrong with me. I'm not normal. I'm not like everybody else. And this can go both ways. This can be because I am not as mature as other guys, or it can be because I'm too hairy. Like, I've got a full bush and in seventh grade, and I'm embarrassed. I have to shave my ass. I've heard that part of it too, because now I've got a hairy ass and legs, and I've got a bush, and I'm growing hair on my chest, and I'm a 12-year-old, and nobody's talked to me about this. And I would argue that pubic hair does serve a purpose. It serves a design purpose. If you think about it, it draws the eye towards the penis intentionally. It's if you study design, artistic design, there's a way that a man's body is designed. His obliques point to the penis, the pubic hair points to the penis, the happy trail from hair. If you got hair on your chest going down your belly, it's all pointing, hey, look here. Here's the big star attraction.
So are you saying that God made landscaping?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. God is a landscaper.
He's a landscaper on his creation, i.e. Manscaping.
Hey, looky here, boys. So
yeah.
So this can go either way, because body hair can be a source of shame and harm, or lack of body hair can be a source of shame and harm. And I think it goes back to this issue of we have all been harmed in our bodies in some way. And this is just one way that our bodies can be harmed. Either curses were spoken against us about our hairiness or our lack of hairiness, and then we take up those curses and we own them. It becomes a part of our identity that there's something wrong with me because I'm too hairy or I'm not hairy enough. It's just this, it's the same conversation around penis size, it's the same conversation around height, it's the same conversation around your nose. Like, whatever there is that can be used against you can and will be used against you by evil.
Well, let's get curious about what we do on this podcast and talk about sexual arousal. So there's two different sides that you just proposed. There's having less body hair, And let's just talk about attraction to less body hair. And then let's talk about attraction to more body hair. And where could both of those attractions come from? What's the formation of that? And what might someone be looking for in that attraction?
So I would go to masculinity because we're talking about male body hair in particular. And it's
Mhm.
going to start with how your father models masculinity and sexuality to you.
So we're talking about the more body hair part in the masculinity right now, right?
It could be either, because
Could be either. Okay.
if you have a dad that's kind of not hairy, that's going to model it from his body standpoint. It's going to model it in one way. But the more important thing is, how does your father engage you with his body regarding your body? Because so much of how we embody masculinity is in what's happening with our penis, with our chest, with our muscles, with how we look as males, how we're designed to be. And so dads have to engage their sons. And a lot of the stories of harm that I hear are about fathers that are overly prudish with their body. So I'll ask guys, when you were growing up as a little boy, did you shower with your dad? Do you have any memories of being naked with your dad? The answer is often, oh God, no, that would be forbidden in our home. Like a child should never see their father naked. And I'm like, really? Why is that? Well, because it's
Just the way we
I'm
did
not
it. We
sure.
don't do it.
And so there is this this inordinate mystery that's created, I think, in a little boy who just wants to connect with and be like his dad. And yet if his dad has this intense, no, you can't see me naked thing going on, it's going to intensify that because the little boy wants to be like his dad. So a lot of it is how does your dad display or not his body? And I think there's an appropriate way of doing that, and it can be very inappropriate too. There's kind of a parading my nakedness, like, hey, look at me and affirm me. Or there's like, hey, this is normal, guys. Like guys are naked in the locker room. Let's go shave together, that type of thing. So, depending on the message that your father is delivering, again, non-verbally is more important than anything, but the verbal is important as well. What conversations are you having around your body and your developing sexuality? Then there's your peers. How do you compare with others? Because men look to other men as a signal for their own developing body. Most boys probably stumble onto porn. I don't know that there's been any research on this, but anecdotally, I can tell you a lot of guys got curious about porn as they became curious about their own developing body. And the
And
question was,
sexuality and how it works. And so
yes,
you see the images of the men in porn that are that have big penises and are virile, and their body hair can become a model for how you want to emulate.
again, one way or the other. You can have really hairy guys, which in the gay community is called bears or otters, or you can have really bald guys, which is kind of twinks, or they've shaved their body hair.
Yeah, in
Either of
straight
those,
porn, there's usually on the straight on the shaved or waxed side, there's not a lot of body hair in straight porn.
yeah. And there's a reason for that, is because it adds this is one of the reasons why manscaping became popular, is the optical inch. the you remove the pubic hair and you're gaining an inch or two of size appearance. Again, this is about design. It's about how the design of the body works, but it makes your penis look better if you shave all your pubic hair off. And that really became in vogue, I think, in the 90s. And there's an interesting co-occurring phenomenon in the 90s, and that is that boys stopped showering together in middle school and high school after team sports or gym class because there started to be lawsuits around forced nudity, and how that made some boys uncomfortable.
And remember the cultural icon in the early 90s, for those of you who are old enough to remember it, Baywatch. There wasn't a stitch of hair visible on those guys.
Really, David? I thought David Hasselhoff was kind of. Did he
No, he
shave?
trimmed that sucker. He trimmed it
Oh,
really tight.
okay.
I mean, Hasselhoff is a bear. If you he's a bear with naturally, but he had it all trimmed up,
Yeah.
and it was all nice and neat and manscaped for sure. So you can
So,
only imply how
so
that
you,
looks.
I wonder if that's coming from mainstream culture to porn. I think it's probably driven by porn to
Oh
mainstream
yeah,
culture more than
yes,
anything, right? So it
yes.
starts in porn because of that reason, is it makes the performers' penises look larger.
Scott,
And
everything starts with porn, VHS, DVDs,
yeah, yeah,
streaming,
yeah.
all the tech, all the cultural influences start with porn.
And I think it probably comes over from the gay community in gay porn, because a lot of the gay community prized cleanly shaven, waxed, smooth skin, because it shows musculature more. And the gay icon is the six pack abs, the muscles. And so you remove the body hair so you can see that. That gets adopted into mainstream porn. So that then begins to normalize shaving your body hair off, and particularly your pubic hair. And there may be there's, I would say there's probably legitimate reasons. If you want to enjoy oral sex with your partner and you want them performing oral sex on you, it probably doesn't aid that by having a mouthful of hair down there. So,
Yeah,
so,
it makes it more challenging operationally for
so
sure. Yeah.
operationally, it makes the process of having oral sex performed on you a little smoother. And a lot of guys claim that it cuts down on itching and chafing in the summer months and things like that. So we're not stigmatizing that. We're just curious about, if you're really driven by the smooth look, like, be curious about where that came from in your life, and how is it serving you, what purpose is it gain. If you're drawn to hairiness, there's a reason for that too. And instead of shaming yourself about either of those things, be curious about them. And it's going to tie back to your formative stories. How did I learn about masculinity? How did I learn about the male body? And what are those messages that I just kind of absorbed?
Well, I think we've also got to be curious around how you were, and we've got a generation of people who were taught about sexuality through porn. And so when you have, depending on when you first started watching porn, and depending, I mean, if you started watching porn in the 70s and 80s, you probably comfortable with a little more hair because the bush was all in vogue and everybody had a bush and it was no big deal and hairiness was masculinity. But then in the 90s and beyond, it seems like with the increase of technology that allowed things to be more precise. So when you got pictures and video that were HD and you were able to see all the different, I mean, like literal follicles of hair, it's kind of like, yeah, that's not very attractive. So I want to see smooth. I want to see, especially when you're looking at pictures of genitals, you want to see the details, the size, the curve, the folds, all the different aspects of those pictures and videos and those close-up shots. You got to have manscaping. You got to have shaving. You got to have waxing to be able to make that happen. And if you're trying to copy, as young people always do, copy the things that you see online to be a more sexual person, you're going to just do that. And so I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that in the culture, trimming body hair is because of this aspect of how I learned to see other people's genitals, and I see my own genitals in the same way.
Absolutely, for sure. We're mirroring
Yeah,
behavior. We're mirroring what was modeled for us.
yeah.
And so I'm just asking guys to be curious about that, because one of the areas where I do encounter a lot of body shame with guys is around their body hair. And to me, it's more common for guys, I think, to experience shame around being too hairy. And so one of the, and I'll just share, this is a beautiful process that I've heard before, and I've done this with a couple of friends, and this has to be done in a very safe setting. But you get a group of guys and you're in like a sauna, and you have one of the guys stand in front of you that's got a real big issue with shame around his body. Maybe it's hair, maybe it's penis size, maybe it's his belly, whatever. And so he's standing in front of you in the sauna with a bunch of other guys, and you praise him for the goodness, the beauty that you see in his body. And man, that is a transforming experience. And I think even for fathers growing up, and I had these conversations with my sons at times, conversations, not really doing this process, but where a father really blesses his son's body and says, son, you got a beautiful body. Like, God made you this way, and there's so much good about it. And I hope you don't feel, do you feel any shame about your body here? Or do you feel shame that you're not hairy enough? And being able to have a conversation with your son about where he feels shame, because I guarantee you, we all feel shame. We've all cursed aspects of our body. And part of healing is to name those curses that we have maybe heard, Like, you're an ape, you're a hairy ape, or you're a little boy, you don't have any pubic hair. Like, all of those curses that can be made against us, where have we internalized those and turned them against ourselves? And how can we return instead and bless our bodies? Because our body, we're told in the scripture, is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And there's nothing wrong if you want to trim the hedges, but if God made you a hairy man, that's glorious. That's beautiful. If God made you smooth, that's also glorious and beautiful. And by the way, both of those things are mentioned in the Bible about men. Esau was a hairy man, Jacob was smooth, right? Features of men are mentioned in the Bible. Saul was more handsome and stood taller than everybody else. So there are these aspects of masculinity that seems like the Bible is tipping our hand to and saying, yeah, we do notice physical attributes of people. You bring something of the glory of God to every encounter you're engaged in an embodied way. But in which ways has your body then been a source of harm and cursing? And how can you stop participating in that and return to bless instead of curse? So that's kind of the where do we go with this? You have to be able to tell those stories where the harm started in your life, and then you have to do something that's embodied in order to reverse the ways in which you've been harmed around your body.
So yeah, Scott, I mean, what we're talking about is accepting my body, is accepting it for what it is. Now, I'm gonna be clear, we've said that. If you want to trim, if you want to manscape, great. But if you're manscaping because you don't accept your body, you're trying to conform to somebody else's idea of what is good, that's where the real curiosity would come in. Is what is it about yourself that you do not like, that you feel like is not good enough, or would be made better through this particular grooming regimen, or maybe you would be more attractive if you trimmed this or let that grow out. And that starts on an emotional level. It starts what we talked about earlier, our parents affirming us and giving us a context of acceptance, but also doing the work of what it means to love yourself as you are, not in the masturbation way. That's the several songs have been written about love myself, which means jack off. We're talking about accepting yourself. We're talking about having an attitude of I'm good no matter what. If it's hairy, if it's not hairy, if it's muscular, if it's not muscular. I mean, healthy obviously is good, but I don't think hair and health really have a ton to do with each other. But we want you to have a healthy experience of self acceptance so that you can understand that that's who you are and what you were made to be. It's good to be you. And so that work of getting to a place of acceptance always comes in the context of a group. It's impossible for me to accept myself in my own head, because you know what I'm going to do in my own head, Scott?
Criticize yourself,
I'm going to
condemn
shit all
yourself,
over me.
shit
That's
all over
right.
yourself.
I am just going to create all the worst scenarios of how bad I am. But when I get in a group of other people, just like that, sauna experience or small group, we have having Thomas Fairman on talking about the retreats that he does about accepting your body. We want to give you an experience for you to be able to be acceptable just as you are. Then whatever trimming implement you want to use, go for it. Have fun. I mean, draw butterflies and rainbows in your pubic hair. Who cares, right? That's up to you, dude. You have a good time. But as long as you love yourself, that's what we really, really care about.
Yeah. So, guys, if this is an area of interest to you, if you're shaving your pubes or your chest or your back and you're not really sure why, or you feel a lot of shame around that, our invitation is to get curious about that. Where does that start in your life? What stories can you remember about how you begin to be ashamed of your body hair? And write those stories out and find a place where you can tell those to safe other friends who can see you in them and give you the kindness and care that was really lacking as you were growing up during those stories. So that's our invitation always, to get curious about what's going on in your unconscious mind by thinking about what happened to you growing up or things that trigger you today. And we're always here on a next episode of the show to get into some other interesting topics. And so we hope you'll join us on our next episode of We Got Balls.
And you do too. Take care, guys.
See ya.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris and with Scott at successfulmen.com.